The horrible part about that story, if that wasn't horrible enough, was that she was being trafficked that day on that parking lot. And I just didn't understand how this worked. And I really felt like I let her down. And I mean, I literally had her in the palm of my hand. I didn't know what to do with her. And every agency has some kind of a motto, right? And my agency's motto was service and protection. And I was like, I didn't serve her. I sure as hell didn't protect her.
Welcome to Hey Chaplain. My name is Jared Altick, and I'm a chaplain with the police department. Hey Chaplain is the officer wellness podcast, which brings you expertise and wisdom from police officers around the world. From the LAPD to Scotland Yard, the guests on Hey Chaplain are sharing their wisdom and experience so that you don't have to do everything the hard way. When an officer looks up this podcast on a podcast app like Apple Podcasts, they see ratings and reviews. If you're listening on Apple Podcasts and you like what we do here at Hey Chaplain, then you can encourage those officers to hit play by leaving a 5-star rating and writing a review that tells them what Hey Chaplain has done for you. Your ratings and reviews, your recommendation, means the world. Today, we're talking to Dan Nash from the Human Trafficking Training Center, and he's going to talk about the difficult encounters officers have with prostitutes who are being controlled by traffickers and how they can be helped. In fact, right off the bat, Dan is going to lay out the paradox that many trafficking victims find themselves in. They didn't willingly get into this life of prostitution, but they may not willingly leave it either. How does a cop navigate that? Well, Dan Nash has answers, and you're going to want to learn more. Here's Dan Nash. Hello, Dan. How are you today?
I'm great, Jared. How are you doing?
I'm doing pretty well. I have been pestering you forever. You're a busy, busy guy. You're hard to pin down.
Yeah, I'm a little busy. Sometimes I wish I could have 2 or 3 of me for sure.
Well, you do a great job of what you do. And what you do is you teach people about human trafficking. And I would like to know, just from like a police officer's point of view, what is misunderstood? What did you not understand? What do you think people today don't understand? What are the basic misconceptions about human trafficking in the United States?
I think there are 2 really big ones. And the first one is that these victims of trafficking are going to come to you and jump in your arms and be like, oh my God, thank you. Thank you so much for saving me, for helping me. I've been trying to get away and all this kind of stuff. That's not what happens. That only happens in Hollywood television shows. In the real world, that's not what happens. Typically, these victims are belligerent, they're uncooperative, they have tremendous amounts of PTSD, they're trauma bonded to their trafficker, they're under the influence of drugs and alcohol. They got a lot of stuff going on. So when we find them in law enforcement, typically they are not friendly to us.
Talk to me about that trauma bonding. What does that look like?
So trauma bonding basically, and I think some people understand it in an older term, which is Stockholm syndrome, right? And that is where you become trauma bonded to your trafficker because you went through this horrible experience together. And even though this is maybe the person that was doing all these horrible things to you, you literally become bonded with them because you went through this traumatic experience together, right? It can be like, you and I don't really know each other, or if we do know each other, we may not even like each other. But then we were on this plane crash together and the whole plane was in this horrible wreck and everybody died but you and I. Well, now you and I have this like special bond that we have, even though we went through this horrible trauma together because we were there together and went through this at the same time. That's kind of like a very layman's way to try to explain it. But that's what we see when it comes to trafficking victims. So that brings us to the second most misunderstood thing, which is prostitution. People believe that prostitution is like some choice, or maybe they've made a whole host of poor choices in their life to maybe get addicted to drugs and alcohol or put themselves in a position where they now are engaging in prostitution and that they want to do this, right? So a lot of things that you will hear in this day and age in 2025 is the term sex worker. Well, they're sex workers. Well, if you really look at the academic research, that shows that that's actually not true. In America and the European research, the Canadian research, it's all really consistent. And that is some 90, 92, 93% of persons involved in commercial sex, in other words, prostitution, are under third-party control. In other words, there is somebody behind them that is forcing them to do this, right? They don't actually want to do this. Somebody is forcing them to do it, right? And one of the things that I do when I'm teaching is I will ask the class, and I've done this in 18,000 people that I've taught all across the world, right? Is there anybody in here that when they were 13, 14, or 15 years old thought to themselves, when I grow up, I think I want to be a prostitute. I want to have sex with 10 or 15 men a day, and I want to have to avoid serial killers because serial killers target prostitutes, and I want to get STIs and UTIs and have all these horrible things done to me because the sex buyers are going to act out all their paraphilias on me and insert things inside of me and do all these horrible things to me. Geez, if I could just grow up and be a prostitute, that would be great. Please God, please God, please God, let me be a prostitute someday. So I asked the whole class to say, is there anybody that ever thought that? And nobody ever raises their hand. And then I come up and then I ask them this question. If people wanted to engage in prostitution, we would not need traffickers.
Yes.
Just something as simple as that. We would not need traffickers. So really the idea, number one, that people want to do this is really a fallacy. It's really a political ideology that's not true. And then number two, that they're going to come running and jump in your arms and say, please, please, please help me. Those are the first two misconceptions I think that everybody has about trafficking. And then the third thing is that everybody thinks that the police are trained in human trafficking, and they're not. I mean, the most comprehensive research out there that was done in 2016 showed that only 17% of law enforcement in America have any human trafficking training whatsoever, any. And if you actually broke that down between skills-based training, which is what we provide, and awareness-based training, which is like 99% of all human trafficking training, it's only 8%. So only 8% of the police have any training whatsoever. And then the next thing is people always say is, yeah, but that's just like the small police departments, right? That's the small sheriff's departments, the small police departments. So I use these as examples, not because I'm trying to throw anybody under the bus. That's not it at all. I'm using them because they're ginormous, giant agencies that we have all heard about, right? So number one, I use the FBI because everybody knows who the FBI is, right? And they're an enormous, massive agency. You know how much training the FBI gets in human trafficking? Zero. Not one single minute. Not one single minute of training do they have in human trafficking. So how do you expect them to be good at it, right? I can go further. Customs and Border Patrol. They're on our border. They're protecting our border. Surely they're trained in human trafficking. Nope, they're not trained in whatsoever at all. How about the Drug Enforcement Administration? They're out investigating drug crimes, right? And we know that drugs and trafficking have a big crossover because if I'm your trafficker, I get you addicted to drugs. Well, now I can control you because not only am I your trafficker, but I'm your drug dealer, right? So they must be trained. Nope, they have no training in human trafficking. How about the U.S. Marshals? They do a fantastic job going out and finding missing kids and these kinds of things. And you see all the time where they went out and they found all these missing kids. Well, we know from research that 1 in 5 missing kids is probably a trafficking victim. So surely they're trained in human trafficking. The answer is no. The U.S. Marshals are not trained in human trafficking. So this misconception that law enforcement is trained in human trafficking is horribly wrong. They're not. They're just not.
In your estimate, how many people are being trafficked?
If you're asking me in the United States, that's a number that we don't really know. I can give you some idea. We know there's probably between 100,000 and 300,000 children that are being trafficked in the United States. That number's been around for a while. We know that the southern border has increased that number because of the unaccompanied minors that we don't know what happened to them. Now, are all of them being trafficked? Well, of course not. But are some of them being trafficked? Yeah. And we know there's some 200,000 unaccompanied minors. We don't know where they went to. So even if 10% are being trafficked, that's 20,000 more kids right there, right? We know that the illicit massage business industry, which is the largest and the fastest growing of trafficking in America, they've increased 32% in 3 years, 46% in 8 years, which is all Chinese organized crime. We know that right there is some 50 to 70,000 Chinese girls that are being trafficked just in the illicit massage business industry in America. And a sad state of that is in California and New York, there are more illicit massage businesses than there are Starbucks and McDonald's combined.
Wow.
So we're not winning. The estimates are somewhere around 30 to 50 million people worldwide. But I mean, how do you really know? It's all just kind of a guess, right?
In your personal experience, when you've encountered a trafficked individual, how many of them were first being trafficked as minors?
In all the years that I've been trying to figure out human trafficking and work in human trafficking, I've only found one trafficking victim ever in all that time that was not physically or sexually abused as a child. How about that? That's a much better thing. The story is almost always the same when you talk to these trafficking victims: physically or sexually abused as a kid, physically or sexually abused as a kid, physically or sexually abused as a kid. And that's what starts this vulnerability chain that they go on, that the traffickers look for, and then they exploit those vulnerabilities. There's a whole groove of people that traffic people, right? We have something that we refer to as the Big Five. And these are the big five groups that do most of the trafficking in America, right? This is Russian organized crime, Chinese organized crime, street gangs, the Mexican cartels, and then lastly, friends and family. Of all those five groups, friends and family is the largest. That makes up somewhere between 30 and 40% of all trafficking. So this is the boyfriend, the fiance, the husband, the mother, the father. That is the biggest part of trafficking in America.
You would think a parent wouldn't do that.
Exactly. And then the other thing that I always ask, and I'm sure when you were in the training, Darren asked you, of the mother or father, who's more likely to traffic? And it's typically the mother.
Yeah.
Which is always surprising, right?
Yeah. I don't recall the name. There was a porn star who was in the news recently because she was having sex with hundreds and hundreds of people, like in one day or something. And her manager was her mother.
Yeah.
And I'm just like, of course. That, yeah, I wouldn't have thought that before, but after doing the human trafficking training, I was like, yeah, of course, her manager.
Her mother is still exploiting her.
I'm using air quotes. Yeah, her mother.
Still exploiting her to this day.
Dan, where are you from? Tell me a little bit about yourself.
I grew up in the Ozark Mountains of Southwest Missouri. So I grew up on a farm in the Ozarks, just in the hills and hollers of the Ozarks. My original plan was to go to law school, and a couple, 3 months before law school started, I decided I didn't want to do that. And I went home and told my dad I wasn't going to go to law school. And he, of course, was not overly thrilled. And then he's like, so what are you going to do? And I said, I think I want to go be a state trooper. And he's like, are you insane? And I didn't know if I would get hired or not. At that time, it was very difficult to get hired, especially in Missouri. There was about 6,000 people that put in for 60 spots. So it was very competitive. And I was fortunate enough to get hired. And after being in patrol, like everybody is, I made detective relatively quickly in my law enforcement career. And my first assignment was narcotics and vice. So that's where I started seeing vice-related crimes like prostitution, right? And honestly, I had no idea what I was doing. Nobody gave me any training. I was just like, oh, they're just like, let's go arrest some prostitutes, right? And literally we ran around and we arrested these girls and we patted ourselves on the back and we told ourselves we were doing our part for God and country. And at some point it started kind of resonating with me that I don't know that we're doing this correctly. And then eventually I had an incident where I'd met a young lady who was about 20 on a parking lot. And she was with this guy that was about 40. And I was concerned that there was prostitution taking place. And I did exactly what we had all been trained to do in the academy. I separated them and I started asking law enforcement questions. Where are you coming from? Where are you going to today? How do you know each other? Where you live? How you make money? And he was a criminal. And so, I mean, I knew how to handle him. Her, on the other part, she was like a 20-year-old kid. And the more I'm talking to her, and the more belligerent she becomes, and she's totally belligerent, uncooperative. And she eventually starts yelling at me and she's cursing at me. And I'm like, I'm just trying to figure out what's going on. And eventually she gets frustrated and I get frustrated and I just say, you're free to go. And off she goes. Right. And a couple months later, I get a call from local PD and they're like, hey, do you know this girl? I'm like, yep, I do. I just contacted her a couple months ago. And they're like, well, we just found her today in one of those rent by the week hotels, that every town has. And she was dead in a bathtub. And the officers said, it looks like she's committed suicide. And on the lip of the tub, we found a photo of a little boy, a little infant child. And we didn't really know what that had to do with anything. And then later we made notification to the mother. Her mother said, yeah, I'm not surprised. And then the mother tells them, she said, my daughter was molested from the time she was a little kid. And I didn't know. She never disclosed. And I didn't find out till later in life. And she said, when my daughter was in junior high school, she wasn't doing well in school. And high school got worse. She was not getting along with the other kids. And she was fighting and flunking out and skipping school. And she started getting involved in drugs and alcohol. And she started dating older guys. And she became, that girl, air quotes, that girl, until eventually she just quit school and ran away from home and didn't come back. And then she said, I got a call from Child Protective Services like 2 years later when she would have been like 19. And they said, hey, your daughter's here at the hospital and she just gave birth to a son. But he tested positive for methamphetamine. So we're going to have to remove him. Will you come down and take custody of your grandson? And she does. She rushes down there, sees her grandson, sees her daughter for the first time in 2 years. And she takes that photo of her grandson. And that's the photo that the daughter had eventually on the lip of the bathtub. And her daughter checked out of the hospital later that day. She never saw her daughter again. The horrible part about that story, if that wasn't horrible enough, was that she was being trafficked that day on that parking lot. And I just didn't understand how this worked. And I really felt like I let her down. And I literally had her in the palm of my hand. I didn't know what to do with her. And every agency has some kind of a motto, right? And my agency's motto was service and protection. And I was like, I didn't serve her. I sure as hell didn't protect her. So it became kind of a mission for me to try to figure out this trafficking stuff. And there was no training. There was no mentors. There was no nothing. And I started trying to figure this stuff out. And honestly, it's not that I'm some smart guy. I'm a hillbilly from the Ozarks. I just screwed stuff up for a really long time and eventually started to figure a few things out, right? And I fought tooth and nail because everybody fought against me. People I worked with fought against me. My agency fought against me. Everybody thought I was nuts and that these are just hookers and hoes and junkies and skanks and lot lizards and all the other horrible names we name them. And I was like, I don't think so. I think we're doing something wrong. I think they're victims. And eventually I started slowly figuring some things out and having some success. And then when I retired, I just kind of fell into this. People were like, hey, would you come and teach us how to do this? I never thought it would turn into like a 70-hour-a-week job. That's for sure.
Like I said, I have heard everyone around you talks about how busy you are. And so you have really committed yourself to this. If you could rewrite the laws, like you could start over from scratch and rewrite the laws, what would you change to make this situation better from a legal point of view?
So honestly, most of the states have pretty decent laws. The federal law, the state, most of them have, some are better than others, but most of them are not bad. It's not the laws that is the problem. It's the fact that the police don't know what to do to investigate it. So it won't really matter how hard or how harsh you make the laws. I think if I could pass a law, the law would be every police officer in America gets at least 8 hours of human trafficking training, and it has to be skills-based training, and it has to incorporate these 6 or 8 different things. And if we did that, we would change trafficking in America overnight. Because I see it every time we go and we train people. I literally see it where these officers, I just came from Utah a couple weeks ago. I did a training in Provo, a training in Salt Lake, and then a training in St. George. I covered like a big chunk of the state of Utah in 1 week. And literally, while I was in Salt Lake the very next day, after we had already trained Provo PD found a trafficking victim the next day, 17 hours after the fact. And then as I left Salt Lake City and was driving to St. George, Utah, they went on another call and found 3 trafficking victims at a hotel and arrested some gang member who was there trafficking them. So I hadn't even left the state yet, and they found 4 trafficking victims.
And that's happened to you guys repeatedly.
It happens all the time.
Where you've heard back after doing training, you hear back that like, oh, wow, we found somebody the next day.
Just last year, we did 59 trainings in 28 states, taught 6,888 cops. They left our training and found 587 trafficking victims. I mean, that's what happens. And some of these guys are so good at this. I mean, Kyle Bradley and Mike Guzman down at Texas DPS, they're Texas troopers, and those 2 guys by themselves have found 30 trafficking victims in 24 months. By themselves, 2 people. And it's not just them. I mean, there's all kinds of people across the country. I could sit here and give you 20 names, but they need to know. And the analogy that I like to use is, how do you expect law enforcement to arrest a drunk driver if they don't know what a drunk driver looks like driving down the road? They got to be able to walk up on that car and smell the odor of intoxicants and see bloodshot, glassy eyes and slurred speech, and ask them to step out of the car and see the decreased motor skills, and then ask them to do a standardized field sobriety test and realize that they're intoxicated. And then they have to know when they have probable cause to make that arrest. And then they have to take them down to the jail and do a breath test, and then write all the reports and send them to the prosecutor. Those are skills. And we learn those in the academy. We learn those in FTO. But if we did not learn those, no police officer would arrest a drunk driver because we didn't know what to do. It's the same with trafficking. Once you teach it to them, they go and find them.
I'm going to ask you a question I almost never ask police officers. If you had to do it over again, knowing what you know now, what would you have done differently with that story you told me earlier about the 20-year-old girl and the 40-year-old guy? What, if you had been trained by current you, what would you have done differently?
So we created something that we teach, and we're pretty much the only people that teach it, and it belongs to us. And that is a specialized way that we talk to trafficking victims. And it's really just basic psychology. But if you do a traditional police law enforcement interview with a trafficking victim, the disclosure rate's about 6 to 7% across America. And we've known that for 30, 40 years. And we just continue to keep doing it that way. Like, it's going to change, right? So we created something different, and it's got a success rate of about 50-50. So we've literally went from 6% to 50% by just doing it this new way. And when we do it this new way, like Kyle Bradley and Mike Guzman and all these other people that utilize this new strategy, they get these victims to talk to them. They get these victims to get into services. I mean, we get them out of the street. We get them away from that trafficker. We get them, help that they need. And that's what I would change. You can't go back in time, right? But if I could, and I could do it differently, that's what I would do differently.
If an officer is listening to this and they're like, man, I've never had any of this training. All of this sounds really good, but I want to find out more. How do they pursue that? How do they get you or one of your trainers in front of them at their agency?
You could go to our website, which is humantraffickingtrainingcenter.com, all together, humantraffickingtrainingcenter.com. You can see all of our trainings on there. If the trainings are on our website, that means they're already paid for, they're already funded, and then they're free for law enforcement to go and attend. So you can find one that's near you in America, and you can go, oh, that one's near me. And then you can just RSVP right on the website, sign up. And as long as you're law enforcement, you get to go. If we don't have a training that's near you and you want one, then you can just call me right from the website and say, hey, we'd like to bring a training to wherever. And I had 2 people call me today and said, hey, what will it take to get you to come here, right? We probably get, 15 calls a week like that.
But how do those get paid for?
So sometimes the agency will pay for them, but a lot of times the agency does not have the funding to do that, right? So then we find other ways to do it. So, for example, the training that you went to, the faith-based community came together and said, hey, we know local law enforcement does not have the money to pay for all this. So because, to fund the police and all that kind of stuff and budget cuts and everything else. So we will pay for it as long as we get law enforcement to go. So the faith-based community, different businesses get involved, different organizations get involved. There's a whole host of people that will pay for these trainings if you do not have money yourself. Sometimes if you have a little bit of money, like today, one of the agencies that called me said, "Hey, I got enough money to pay for part of this, but I can't cover the rest." So I gave them some phone numbers to call, and they called me later that day and said, "Hey, I found the money already. Let's do this. When can we get you on the calendar?" Typically, the money is not the issue. For us, the big issue is people always want it like, "I want you here like in 3 weeks." And I'm like, that ain't going to happen. Typically, we're like 6, 7, 8 months out. So the quicker, I tell people, the quicker that you can call me and we can find a date, the better off we all are. And then we'll worry about the money and everything else later.
Yeah, the training I went to was at a big church in a small town, just a little bit down the highway. And we had officers there from, goodness, I don't know how many agencies.
I think there was 12 or 13 different agencies that were represented in the training that you went to, both on the Missouri and the Kansas side. We've done, smaller trainings like the one you went to. And then we've done really, really big ones where we've done 400, 500, 600 people in a room.
When you get feedback from these trainings, what do officers say? Specifically, I'm curious, what do they find the most interesting?
I think the biggest feedback thing that we get is, "Man, I've screwed this up. And now I feel really, really bad." Right. And I have to give them honestly, I've had officers in tears saying, "I know I've let these trafficking victims go." And they start telling me a story of what it was, right? Whether it was a car stop or a call they went on or whatever. And I totally let this go. And now I'm looking back going, "Oh my God, I think that girl's probably still being trafficked and I let her down." And I have to really kind of give them a pep talk and say, "It's not your fault. You did not know. You were not trained properly. I realize you feel bad, and we can waller in that, or we can do better moving forward. And the next time that you find something like this, now you're prepared. Now you have the skills and you're ready to go do this. So now moving forward, let's do it the right way," right? Because we can all sit around and Monday morning quarterback ourselves to death, and we can all feel bad about how horrible we were. And then I tell people, I said, "Shit, man, I had a girl that suicided in a bathtub." So, I mean, we've all been there.
Yeah. I know in the training I was in, I had several cops sitting behind me, and there were several aha moments. And we were actually sitting in a church building, and they were kidding to themselves, "But we should be swearing in church." But they kept saying, "Oh, blank," because every time in the training something would come up, and they're like, "I've never thought of that," or "I didn't realize that's what I was looking at."
Exactly.
And whether it was talking about having like a trafficked young woman who could read the text messages and interpret for the police, that kind of story, that was an aha moment. Some of the trauma bonding stories, those were aha moments where cops are listening to the story and thinking back to what they themselves have seen and said, "Wow, I am looking at that in a new light."
For sure. Police officers don't take these jobs because we're going to make a ton of money or because we're going to get all these amazing accolades. It's not why we do this, right? We do this because we want to make our community better, and we want to make our community safer, and we want to help people, and we want to get the bad folks that are hurting people off the street. They take it personally if they feel like they've let somebody down and had it right in front of them and didn't do something about it, right? Especially when it's a victim. Especially even worse if it turns out to be a kid or a juvenile, then you're like really feeling bad about it, right?
Dan, thank you so much for coming on the show today. You did a fantastic job. I really appreciate what you do.
Thank you so much for having me. It's been fun. And thank you so much for being persistent and putting up with me and my schedule.
Thank you. I want to thank Dan for being on the show. The Human Trafficking Training Center is unique in my mind for at least one reason. I've gone to all kinds of law enforcement trainings over the years, and most of them say things that I'm expecting to hear. Sometimes they say them really, really well or make a great point, but it's not anything that I didn't expect. But the training with the Human Trafficking Training Center genuinely taught me new things, and that is a rare treat. HumanTraffickingTrainingCenter.com has a link in our show notes. On the next episode of Hey Chaplain.
suicide prevention, it's not working. In fact, I call it and I say that suicide prevention is dead wrong. It's not working the way that it was intended. We're not saving numerous lives. The return on investment for spending millions, even billions of dollars into these prevention programs is actually leading us in a worse, it's actually leading us down a different road that we really didn't expect to be on in 2025.
Because we are spending a lot more money on it than we were 25 years ago.
Oh, absolutely. And what they'll say is, well, the numbers continue to go up nationwide, so we need more money. And it's a continual cycle of feed the monster because the monster's out of control when nobody wants to get in control of the monster. And what happens is we keep putting money out, even to agencies nationwide, to our law enforcement agencies with grants. And we give them grants and tell them, hey, I want you to do this program. I want you to make a program, bring people in, whatever you do. And the problem is that everybody and their brother is in this field right now thinking that they're experts. And part of that problem is we're allowing them to be in this space. Some of them should never have been in this space. And we're continuing to regurgitate the same agenda and the same messaging that suicide's an epidemic. We need more money. And yet the numbers continue to go up and we do nothing different.
This show is free for everyone because of those supporters who are quietly helping behind the scenes. If you want to help this show reach more cops, chaplains, and other first responders around the world, please follow the link in the episode description to support the show. The views expressed here are the personal views of the host and our guests and do not necessarily represent the views of any law enforcement agency or its components. If you like this episode, please share it with a cop or someone who loves a cop. Thank you for listening to Hey Chaplain, and as always, pray for peace in our city.